I love bad writing. That's not to say that I like making fun of new authors that are just trying out the medium. I like it when an unbridled egotist writes complete schlock and tries to pass it off as an instant classic. And that's definitely the case with this book. Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably already familiar with Empress Theresa through its original Amazon listing, the Down the Rabbit Hole episode, or Crimson Rogue's extensive review of this awful, awful book. So this video is going to be something a little bit different. I'm a firm believer that just about any story can be made good. It just needs the right angle and the right support. We're going to use Empress Theresa as a thought experiment to attempt to make something that seems unsalvageable, at the very least a readable story. Let's fix Empress Theresa. So here's what we're going to do. My challenge to myself is trying to keep as many of the original plot points of Empress Theresa present in our revised edition. So let's go over the major plot points. When she's 10, Theresa gains powers when a mysterious alien white orb fuses with her. These include super strength and an aiming reticle that gives her super precision. Immediately after the alien fuses with her, the government begins a surveillance of her, but she quickly figures this out and remains in contact with her watchers, who convince her to not reveal her secret to anyone. Although she does confess the alien powers to her local priest. Due to this super precision, in high school, Theresa becomes the star pitcher of a baseball team and helpfully tells us that literally nothing else happened in high school. In college, she meets her husband and gets married at the age of 18. Soon after she's married, the government attempts to assassinate her. Specifically, the president orders her assassination via being sent up into the atmosphere in an unpiloted plane with an atom bomb strapped to it. She escapes, although she doesn't intend to survive the bomb. She more just doesn't want her body to be completely destroyed. She is found floating in the ocean by British ships. She is brought back to England and revived. The reason it's necessary that she's revived is because the alien that fuses with her gives her these powers or changes things around her based on what it perceives she needs. When she was falling, and this logic is hard to follow because this isn't a good book, but the alien, who she named Hal, stops all of the world's wind because the wind resistance of her falling was bothering her. It's not very easy to follow. Now, everyone in the world immediately treats her as a savior because everyone has to love Miss Mary Sue. And she is transported to a British mansion where she messes around, including taking a trip to Paris, while the world is pending starvation because no wind means that rain can't really move anywhere except right where the water is. But she does figure out some sort of keyboard contraption where she can specifically order how to do things for her. Now, her solution to the wind problem is to create giant pillars of water that cause a mist to spray over every inch of the world in a constant rain. She also tilts the Earth from a 23-degree angle to a 5-degree angle, eliminating winter because she thought humans didn't need it. This causes all sorts of problems, including the flooding of coastal towns, to which she responds by throwing a bunch of water into space. This goes off the deep end very quickly, as you can see. Theresa, in an attempt to boost the world's economy and the worst understanding of economics anyone has ever seen, creates thousands, if not millions, of new tons of gold and silver, to which she is sued by owners of gold. It's not clear. She basically not blackmails, but torments the lawyer team for the gold people, and they stop. She fixes the Israel-Palestine conflict by creating a new island for the Jewish people to live on. She is made a general by the United States government and conquers North Korea in an attempt to return it to democracy, even though she plans to act for a brief period as a dictator to make the people of North Korea more accustomed to their new government. And briefly after this, Hal reproduces, sort of, creating hundreds of new versions of it, giving more people access to superpowers. Now, these people aren't as good as saintly Theresa, so she has to figure out a way to absorb these Hals. She puts everyone on Earth into a sort of stasis for 600 years, after which she emerges with her husband and over 400 children, having invented numerous medical devices, and that's pretty much where the story ends, where they assure the public that they will live out the rest of their natural lives and then die by natural means. This is a lot. It's a lot, and it's not a very good lot. But there is potential here. And we are going to dig the gold out of this little dung heap, if we're being honest. Before we continue, we have to consider who these characters are, because that'll help us construct this revised edition. Who is Theresa? Now, Norman, the author, wants us to believe that Theresa is, a saint. She is the purest and goodest of girls. But that doesn't actually play out when you look at how she acts. Theresa is a devoted Catholic, and there is quite a bit of, at times she directly quotes the Bible, or she prays for God's assistance. And I want to keep that, because I think that this still has character potential if we actually do something with it, because despite this being sort of Christian fiction, it doesn't really do anything with how its main character views her faith. Theresa is stated to be kind, but when you look at how she acts, she's very conceited. There's a lot of talk about her appearance, or how she's better than everyone else. She very clearly thinks that she is the most honorable person in the world. She's said to be smart, but in reality, as you can see with her attempts to stop winter and such, she actually doesn't really know what she's doing or understand the impact that her actions have. However, that's not to say that Theresa is stupid. I think there's enough of a plot basis that she is clever to some extent, as far as sort of playing mind games. I'm mostly basing this off of her determining how the government surveillance functions, but we can sort of work at that, see where it goes. Also quite sort of uncaring or unempathetic. When the world, they construct a doomsday clock that's counting down to when they think the mass starvation will start setting in because of the lack of rain. And Theresa very explicitly says she only works on testing out Hal's abilities 6 hours a day with a number of breaks. And even in the middle of her stay at the manor, takes a vacation to Paris. Now, an interesting thing is that when she is there, she also, another interesting thing, I'm going to write uncultured, that's not the best word for it. This is mostly because Norman, for whatever reason, doesn't really like France. But Theresa goes on quite a tangent about how Notre Dame isn't impressive and the Louvre is sort of not what one would expect. They go to a restaurant which must have a dress code, but then sort of says that, oh, these French people think that we're just American slobs. I think we can get some interesting character out of that. So that's Theresa. Now, I would start putting the traits of other characters down here if anyone other than Theresa got any form of reliable characterization. But instead, I'm just gonna put everyone else's one character trait. Everyone loves Theresa. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, yeah, it's because Theresa is Mary Sue. We can't really have that in a functional story. But I think you'll see where I'm going with this in just a moment. Okay, so here I've got all the major plot points of the original and how we're going to revise them. Now, to start off, we're still going to have Theresa get her powers at 10 years. We're going to change how that happens just a tad. So, in the original, a fox sort of just walks up to Theresa. The alien fuses with her. It's very just, and then this happened. Although it's also stated that the fox interacted with Theresa's mother. Actually, the reason it said the alien focuses on Theresa is because it saw her mother wielding a rake, which I thought was a third appendage, and we're gonna cancel that out. Instead, the alien, we're gonna make it so that the alien never interacted with Theresa, it just fell in her vicinity. No reason, she just meets this alien because of proximity. So, in the original novel, the government is alerted to Theresa's powers because there's a spontaneous, drastic heat spike in the area. This is a really bad attempt to justify it from Norman's point. So, we're not going to have the government watching Theresa specifically. I think we can all we have enough suspension of disbelief to believe that the government would have some means of figuring out that an alien landed, but we're not going to have them immediately stake out Theresa as, prime suspect, as it were. We're just going to have them surveying her town. Now, this way, we can still have Theresa realizing what the Watches are doing, but there's a little more tension here, because in the book, she immediately starts directly communicating with the people watching her. She even learns one of their names, Dran Struthers. If we keep this more separated, we can actually build up a little bit of tension. We can have some form of stakes, which in the original novel, there hardly ever are stakes, even when the entire world is gonna starve. Yeah. So, 10 years old. We'll keep the strength and the precision. Although, with the precision here, we're actually gonna have Theresa try out a little earlier on for baseball. And that's gonna be when she gains the precision. In the original, she just wakes up with an aiming reticle, which contradicts pretty much everything else we're told about how the alien works. So move on to high school. Let's actually have a baseball tournament. Let's actually have something happen instead of her just saying that she did baseball. Because most of this high school period, Norman focuses on Theresa getting trolled online, but that was actually added in because people were telling Norman that his book sucked, and he didn't like that, so he wanted to put it in the book. So, let's have Theresa actually do something. Let's have her help the team win a baseball tournament. So, next up, college. Theresa goes to Boston College, and I think with all the things we're adding to this story, we can actually keep college a little on the down low. We can even have it cut off slightly. Now, Norman treats Theresa's marriage as sort of a soulmate situation. But there is one interesting line that we can actually build off of, because despite Norman claiming that this is a family book, he actually includes a line that part of the reason Theresa and Steve, her husband, get married is because they don't think they could, wait to consummate the relationship, which is kind of interesting. It's sort of a carelessness of youth situation, which we can use to set up what's going to happen when Theresa's powers grow exponentially, and maybe dig a little bit more into Theresa's Catholic background, like specifically, a Catholic perspective. Although I'm not super well versed in the traditions of the Catholic Church, but I'm not laying out everything, exactly as it's going to happen. But that's an interesting thing we could do. Then we get to the abduction. Now, in this version of the story, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to try and find some reason that the government would figure out that Theresa has the alien powers. So we're actually going to backtrack here. The heat thing is random and it never comes up again. But at this point in the story, Theresa has developed, by pure need alone, super strength and super precision. Now, we could have her develop some other power based on a need in college. We could stick it to the super strength. But something happens, or we're going to make it so that something happens in college where Theresa reveals her powers, and just the right person is watching, that they figure out what is going on, because it's the government. We can say that they know she came from this town that they were watching. Now, this would have to be something pretty big. In my mind, I'm thinking that, Theresa, I don't know, she hits a building and makes it collapse. It has to be a bit flashy, So that happens. We can have that a little after the wedding. We could maybe have that, I don't know. But it has to be something big enough that the government goes, oh crap, we got to get rid of this chick. So as ridiculous as it is, we're gonna keep the plain with bomb assassination method. We're not gonna keep Theresa's method of escape. Because if you've seen the reading by Frederick Knudsen, if you've seen Crimson Rogue's review, you know that Theresa fills up a bag of Coke bottles, which she uses as buoyancy for her body, even though it's really just to preserve her body. It's not to survive. In this, and this is partially based on a suggestion by Crimson Rogue, Theresa's never going to get on the plane. She is going to escape via a boat. She's gonna run off the aircraft carrier, get a small boat, gonna ride out into the ocean. We can even give this time to give her some sort of, personal armor, maybe Hal generates a shield. So, how are we going to get the wind to stop now that she escapes via boat? Well, we're going to actually do something that makes sense other than her falling and Hal taking away the wind resistance. While she's on the boat, a storm brews. And now, the waves are huge, the rain is driving, Theresa's, she's faced with the threat of drowning. So Hal, sensing her need, stops the wind, calms the storm. Theresa is left floating on a boat. Maybe she runs out of gas in the open ocean. She is picked up by a British military ship. So we'll have to have some sort of communication here going on between, again, in the original, it is said that the President of the US has informed the Canadian and British Prime Ministers of Theresa's existence. So we'll have to have something along that here, that the soldiers know that, okay, this person's like a big deal and we've got to take her to the British government. We've got to figure this out. Now this is where we actually get into the human drama of our revised edition. And what makes the original so appalling is that Theresa's actions are awful. She is decimating the world while the author treats her like a goddess. This is where we're actually, and you'll forgive me, perhaps making the story a bit edgy. This is where we actually, you know, they say if you want to get the most out of your characters, you've got to break them. So, we can have the fact that Theresa somehow caused this leak out to the public. Now, as we've discussed earlier, the one trait that everyone else in this book shares, or at least their only trait, is that they love Theresa. So let's not make it that the author just loves his original character, Do Not Steal. What if Theresa makes everyone like her? Or not so much Theresa. Let's say that Theresa's returned. It's revealed that she is partially responsible. People don't really understand how Hal works. She doesn't really understand how Hal works. And because she's under all of this strain, Hal actually makes the people around Theresa like her, because that's what Hal perceives as the problem. So we now have this character who's receiving greater and greater power. She single-handedly escaped from a military ship, and now everyone likes her. What does that do to a person? This is where it gets juicy. So, now everyone likes Theresa. She's getting a little, more arrogant. She goes on her vacation to Paris. She messes around. Even though there is a doomsday clock, we can keep that in. Everyone around, she's surrounded by yes men, so she doesn't really fully grasp the impending starvation thing. She's really just focusing on what Hal can do and how Hal can help her. But she does figure it out. Now, this is where the ignorance comes into play. Because Theresa has all this power. Everyone around her likes her. She thinks that she can actually improve the world, even if it's only for the sake of her own ego. So she makes the Tower of Water. And this is where it gets tricky, because how she would figure out how to make the water pillars and not the wind, but we can actually do that. Theresa's trying to make everywhere nice, rain everywhere, no more deserts. It's great. She also ends winter because she's gotten this huge influx of power. She thinks she can just fix everything, even though she doesn't realize that things need winter. Even farmers need winter. Animals need winter. It doesn't work. And things start getting worse. We're not going to treat it like the original, where all this stuff happens and all of the catastrophes that this would cause are just brushed out of the way. The world starts going to shit after Theresa does this. Theresa can go on a world tour, and she discovers that coastal towns are being flooded. There's horrible storms. Theresa freaks out in this version. So, what does she do when she, well, and this is where another bit comes in. In the original, it's sort of hand-waved that Theresa just can't turn the planet back to the original axis. In our revised version, Theresa doesn't want to admit her mistake. So what does she do? She throws the water into space. Okay, let's see, what happens next? Okay. Yes, alright. Theresa makes the gold in the original just sort of because we'll help the economy, yay, even though that's not how that works. In this one, Theresa's basically completely obliterated the major industries of plenty of places. So she makes gold in an attempt to eliminate poverty. We're actually going to keep I think we can keep the lawsuit, and we can keep Theresa's reaction of making it so that any vehicle that is entered by the lawyers does not run. I think that's enough sort of psychopathicness, I don't know, that we can basically keep that. Okay. Now this is where it gets a little more delicate. So the next thing that happens is Theresa builds a new island for the people of Israel to live on in an attempt to fix the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is such a thorny piece of thing and such a ridiculous solution. It's such a ridiculous plot point that I think the only way that this can work is if we keep Theresa's sort of population-wide manipulation, brainwashing, I don't know. Because the solution that's provided in the original text is very basic, and I think that can go with how we've characterized Theresa so far. What's also interesting is that a lot of the reason that Norman, the way Norman writes this, he is essentially trying to recreate Exodus. Theresa creates a giant bridge of mud through the ocean to help transport the people there and has them walk. This is something interesting we could do with her faith. I haven't talked about that much. I feel like I've sort of taken away from my original point. I feel like we can show a progression of faith. Because we talked about it a little bit in the marriage, but I think throughout this revised edition we could have a sort of interesting up and down with her faith. I think the moment in the ocean would be a good moment. We can have, in the original, Theresa just quotes like straight up entire paragraphs from the Bible when she's being taken by plane to the aircraft carrier where she'll be sent up to get blown up. I feel like we can have a really good moment when Theresa's on the boat in the storm, and it can be this sort of peak of her religious experience. And then it starts to go downhill because she's just, she's being praised and she's got all this power. I think this can be an interesting moment. This is supposed to be like the arc of her faith. I know that it's not a very good representation. On this new island, I think we can have Theresa sort of start to realize what she's becoming, and we can take sort of a religious angle with this, where she does this weird, she's like trying to convince herself that what she's doing is right in the eyes of God by recreating this scene and helping those who are God's chosen people in their holy text. So that happens. I really don't know. You would need a lot of very careful structuring for this plot point to not make it seem completely ridiculous. But moving on, because we can only try and justify that so much with broad strokes. The North Korea. You can't. Oh God. Oh, Norman Bouton, what have you wrought? So this can be an extension. She fixes this one big world conflict. She's continuing to try and justify her actions. So she's like, okay, well, what other bad stuff's going on? North Korea, pretty bad. And again, we have all the people around her who love her. They make her a 5-star general, which is... Actually, that's one thing that's strange. That Crimson Rogue didn't talk a lot about in his review. Norman Bouton was in the military. He was a doctor in the army, if I recall. But there's a lot in here that, like having her... The book specifically points out that she has her hair down in uniform. You know, she has no experience, but they make her a 5-star general. And it's odd. It's really quite... I really don't have any other word for it because I'm not very knowledgeable on the military, but it's just strange, like a lot of other things in this book. So Theresa takes over North Korea because that's the book. And again, we're going just for something that's actually readable and not a masterpiece. So this is gonna be what it is. But Theresa does say she's gonna be a dictator, and we can spend a little more time here with Theresa, this 19-year-old trying to rule a country, maybe even realizing she becomes the next, she's... How do I put this? Theresa isn't much better for the people than what they originally had. Okay. So, next. The new house. This is wrapped up very clumsily, but I think that this is where we can actually get a good conclusion and have a lot of nice pathos, some tasty pathos. So, yes, okay. So the new house emerge. Now the real threat for Theresa that we can make it, let's have Theresa meet one of these new people. One of these people that have bonded with a new Hal. And what we can do is we can have it... Now, these people aren't really developing their powers, but in the original, it's at first stated that Theresa's Hal can't absorb the other Hals. Let's make that initially true, but also make it so that anyone who owns one of these new Hals is immune to Theresa's effects. And you can see how this is a threat. Because the entire world has basically been brainwashed for 2 years at this point to love Theresa and completely approve of her actions. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of these new Hals. What happens when people start realizing how much Theresa has completely screwed over the planet? So, Theresa, who is the most powerful Hal owner, she stops time. And this is where it irritates me so much that Norman does not use... When Theresa stops time, he never gives us what this stopped time looks like from Theresa's perspective. what happens is that it's all from the point of view of the President of the United States, where they're like, okay, we're going into stasis. They wake up. It's been 600 years. Oh my gosh. Let's actually do this from Theresa's perspective. Let's have Theresa wander around a world frozen in time, trying to figure out how to fix the complete mess she's made. And this is where we can bring back this is a scene I like the idea of. It might be a little sappy. I like the idea of Theresa going back to her hometown and visiting the church that she spent most of her childhood in. You know, like, she goes there, she spends a lot of time there, she reads the Bible, and she's like, oh my gosh, what have I done? What have I become? And for the next 600 years, she fixes things. She tilts the planet back to her original angle. She stables out the level of gold. She brings back the water from space. She returns the atmosphere to its proper density. And then she dies. 'Cause in the original with her having the 400 kids with Steve, it's so out of nowhere and so peculiar. It's the kids have no narrative focus, honestly. We're not given anything to make these kids intriguing. So when those years are up, and we should probably diminish it from 600 because it seems it's a lot of time, which makes it seem a little iffy. Theresa dies. She leaves behind the medical progress that she made over that time, which was present in the original. And that's the end of the story. The story ends where everybody wakes up and everyone, all the Hals are gone because they caused this much chaos. Theresa doesn't absorb them. She destroys them. Everyone wakes up, they realize, oh my god, that was awful. And we can sort of leave on the question of how will Theresa be viewed by history? Maybe we can keep the title Empress Theresa and have that mean something more questionable. So, yeah, that's what I think would be a version of Empress Theresa that would actually be a somewhat decent book. Hey everybody, Future Lambert in here. There were some things that I wanted to elaborate on, some things I didn't really talk about, and I actually realized I accidentally made a new plot hole. With how making everyone like Theresa, it doesn't actually make sense that the gold people would still sue her. So you'd have to either change how her powers worked so that, it's not that just everyone likes her instantly all the time, or you'd have to just strike that scene. A few things I didn't really talk about. Elaborate on her relationship with Steve and give Steve a personality. Give them a bit of chemistry, or don't. Explore their marriage. They both got married, really young, like just something, some sort of conflict, some sort of relationship, just something. I said cut off college. That wasn't the best wording. What I mean by that is you don't need to introduce us to all of her professors and have a bunch of scenes with her in class. It would be a good place to actually explore what she intends to do with her life before it, all goes off the rails and the wind stops. I think in the original, she wants to be a math teacher, but you would hardly know that from a lot of it. I think the sort of overall thing that you could do with this book that I'm trying to get at is it could be like a character study. It could be the story of a life. It's just things need to be in the moment. The book is hardly ever in the moment. It's just narration, like basically just future narration. Like, just let things be in medias res, you know? I'm really excited to put this out. You know, first video sort of showcasing what my channel's gonna be. I've got a bunch of stuff planned for the future. I think my next video is gonna be looking at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and how it's adapted. Specifically the musical. It's gonna be a semi-review for the musical, but, you know, other sorts of adaptations and analysis of the book. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Cheers.
There's kings in distant cities who rule their persons and make them happy, and we won't forget about the service or congratulations.